Hey guys, I'm going to go over a few of the quiz review problems for you. Not all of them, but pick and choose a few of them just so that you have an example of every type of problem. Part 1, we're simply simplifying and identifying the restricted values. So I'm going to do question number 1. The first step in simplifying is to factor. So I want to start by factoring. For the numerator, I can do big X. We've got 6 and 5. Two numbers that would multiply to 6 but add to 5 are 2 and 3. So the top factors to x plus 3 times x plus 2. In the denominator, we've got x cubed plus 3x squared. The GCF method is going to be the method we use for this denominator. We'll factor out an x squared. So we factor out x squared, we're left with x plus 3. Now, before we go to simplify, let's list the excluded values. First, we have this GCF x here. That's going to give me an excluded value of 0. X cannot equal 0. Now, for the factor x plus 3, we set it equal to 0. And we solve, we get x cannot equal negative 3. These are the excluded values, okay? And now we're ready to simplify. So when we're simplifying, we're looking for any factors that are exactly the same in the numerator and denominator. Here, I notice they both have an x plus 3. So I'm left with x plus 2 over x squared. Now, when we first learned about simplifying, we actually learned a few methods. And there's another method that you can do for simplifying. If you have a term in the denominator and two terms in the numerator. So exactly what we have here. I can actually now choose to split this fraction into 2 and make it x over x squared plus 2 over x. And the reason I might choose to do this is because I notice that x over x squared will reduce to 1 over x. Oops, I forgot the squared here. So we get 1 over x plus 2 over x squared. This is a good simplified answer. Hey, this one's also a fine simplified answer too, but be aware that you could see either of those represent the correct answer for this question. For this next one here, we've got x squared minus 81 in the numerator. That's a dots factoring, so we get x plus 9 times x minus 9. And in the denominator, we're going to pull out a GCF. If I pull out a GCF, one thing that I notice is that it's kind of written backwards of how we normally write them, right? I would normally write negative 2x plus 18. We'd have the x first. So that's how I'm going to change it real quick. And now I'm going to look for a GCF. I'm actually going to pull out a GCF of negative 2. That way I make x positive. When I pull out a GCF of negative 2, I'm left with x minus 9. Next thing I'm going to do is list the excluded values. So I have x minus 9. That's going to give me an excluded value of x cannot equal positive 9. You can always solve it for yourself if you need to. And then those will cancel. I'm left with x plus 9 over negative 2. Now, again, I could do the same thing I did in question 1, but I notice here that if I just look at like the x and negative 2 and the 9 and negative 2, nothing's going to simplify if I were to split this, so it would be kind of a waste of time. This is a good answer right here. All right. After simplifying, we learned multiplying. So all of these processes, they kind of build on each other. For multiplying, it's basically just simplifying, but first we need to put our two fractions together. Step 1, factor everything. For this top numerator, x squared minus 2x, I can factor out a GCF of x, and I'm left with x minus 2. In the denominator, two numbers that multiply to 1 but add to 2 are 1 and 1. So I get x plus 1 times x plus 1. Times the second fraction. If I factor the numerator, I've got 3 over 4. That would be 3 and 1. So we get x plus 1 times x plus 3. And in the denominator, there's a GCF of x. So I do x times x plus 3. Now that I have factored form, I'm going to go ahead and list the excluded values. For the x plus 1s here and here, that's an excluded value of x cannot equal -1. That would make it 0. The x all by itself, that tells me x can also not equal 0. And then x plus 3, that means x cannot equal -3 because any of those numbers would make the denominator 0. Now that we've got factored form in our excluded values, we are just going to smush together all of these factors and make one big fraction. And now it's just like the simplifying problems we just did. We're going to look for any factors that cancel. I see an x plus 3. Those will cancel. I also notice these x's out front. They will cancel because they don't have any other numbers with them. And then finally, I see x plus 1. I see 1 on top and 2 on the bottom. They have to cancel in pairs. This one can only cancel this one. You cannot cancel 1 with 2. So what I'm left with here is x minus 2 over x plus 1. There is our final simplified answer with our excluded values. Next, I'm going to move on to division. For division, it's very similar to multiplication, but with one extra step. And that step is keep, change, flip. I'm going to start by factoring. This numerator up here, I'm going to factor out a 2x squared. And I'm left with x minus 6. Over, in the denominator, two numbers that multiply to -12, but add to -4. Would be -6 and 2. So I get x minus 6 times x plus 2. Divided by, in the numerator, I'm going to factor out an 8x squared. And I'm left with x plus 3. Over, in the denominator, multiply to 18 and add to 9 would be 6 and 3. So I get x plus 6 times x plus 3. All right, now we have to do keep, change, flip. So we've got 2x squared times x minus 6 over x minus 6 times x plus 2. Change division to multiplication and flip the second fraction. Now it'll be x plus 6 times x plus 3 over 8x squared times x plus 3. Next, I'm going to list the excluded values. Now, there is one trick here that the excluded values for the division problems come from the denominators, but they also come from the numerator of the second fraction because this was once a denominator. See how we do keep, change, flip, right? They both end up in the denominator, so they are both going to give us the excluded values. Starting with x minus 6, that's going to be an excluded value of 6. For x plus 2, we'd get an excluded value of -2. 8x squared, even though, and I'll do this work up here, even though there's an 8x squared, we set it equal to 0. We solve, we divide, x squared equals 0. That means x equals 0. Okay, so x cannot equal 0 for the 8x squared. And then x plus 3, x cannot equal -3. And finally, we got the x plus 3 down here and up here. We don't have to do it twice. We have that x plus 6, though, so x cannot equal -6. Here are all the many excluded values for this problem. Now we're ready to smush our fractions together and simplify. I see an x plus 3 in both the numerator and denominator. Those will cancel. I also see an x minus 6 in both. Those will cancel. And then I see I've got 2x squared and 8x squared. So first, the x squareds are going to cancel. But then 2 over 4, while 2 and 4 are not exactly the same, I can simplify. They both are divisible by 2. So I can divide 2 by 2 and get 1. And I can divide 8 by 2 and get 4. I can only do this because these numbers are being multiplied by x. You can only do this if there's no addition or subtraction with those numbers. Okay, now we're going to put together what's left. So we have 1 times x plus 6 up top, so that's just x plus 6, over x plus 2 times 4, or 4 times x plus 2. This is our simplified fraction. You don't need to multiply anything out. That is it. All right, we're going to move on to some addition and subtraction. Starting with addition, we need to get common denominators in order to add. So the first step is going to be to factor, but only factor the denominators. Do not factor the numerators. So this denominator here, the only one that factors is 2x squared plus 6x. I can factor out a 2x, and I'm left with x plus 3. Now, if I compare the denominators, they both have a 2x, but this one's missing the x plus 3 that this one has. So I'm going to multiply this first fraction by x plus 3. Remember, we have to do it to both the top and bottom. I'm going to actually distribute up top. 3 times x is 3x. Plus 3 times 3 is 9. But the denominators we are going to leave in factored form. Now that we have common denominators, we're going to add the numerators. So we get 3x plus 9 plus x over 2x times x plus 3. Combine like terms here. I've got 3x and x in the numerator, so we get 4x plus 9 over 2x times x plus 3. Now we have added our two fractions. Before we try to simplify, we're going to list the excluded values. For the 2 times x, that tells me that x cannot equal 0. And then x plus 3, x cannot equal -3. The last step here is to try to factor and see if we can simplify this fraction, going back to what we did in problem 1. In the numerator, 4x plus 9, it does not factor. So for this one, it's not going to simplify. So we have our final simplified form with the excluded values. Next, I'm going to do a subtraction problem. So here, question 9, we've got some subtraction. 7x squared over 9x squared minus 25 minus 2x plus 4 over 6x plus 10. I'm going to start by factoring only the denominators. So for this first denominator, it is a difference of 2 squares. I would get 3x plus 5 times 3x minus 5. And for the second fraction, I can factor out a GCF. The GCF would be 2. So we'd get 2 times 3x plus 5. Now, as you look at these, you are looking for common denominators. What does the first denominator have that the second one is missing? It's missing the 3x minus 5. So I'm going to multiply the second fraction by 3x minus 5. Remember, to both top and bottom. Now, what does the second one have that the first one's missing? It's missing that 2. So we're going to multiply by 2 to, again, both the top and bottom. I'm going to actually multiply the numerators, but I'm going to leave the denominators in factored form. 2 times 7x squared is 14x squared over 2 times 3x plus 5 times 3x minus 5 minus, up top here, we're going to have to distribute. So 2x times 3x is 6x squared. 2x times -5 is -10x. 4 times 3x is 12x. And 4 times negative 5 is negative 20. I didn't write it down here yet because I know that we're going to have to combine some like terms. We've got negative 10x and 12x. That would give us positive 2x. So we get 6x squared plus 2x minus 20 over the common denominator, 2 times 3x plus 5 times 3x minus 5. All right, now I want to subtract these. We are going to start by distributing the negative to everything in the numerator of the fraction that comes after the minus. So we're going to distribute the negative to 6x squared and make it negative 6x squared. We'll distribute the negative to the 2x and make it a negative 2x. And then we'll distribute the negative to the negative 20 and make it positive 20. And now we can just treat this like an addition problem. So we're going to add the numerators and put it over the common denominator. 14x squared minus 6x squared is 8x squared. Then we have minus 2x and then plus 20. In the denominator, we have 2 times 3x plus 5 times 3x minus 5. All right, now that we have combined our fractions, I'm going to move it up here real quick so I have some more space. Now we're going to want to list the excluded values. So the 2 that's out front, it does not have an x, therefore there's no excluded value there. 3x plus 5, that one is an excluded value of negative 5/3. If you forget how to do that, remember, just set 3x plus 5 equal to 0. You're going to then solve, and that's how I got negative 5/3. Doing the same thing for 3x minus 5, we get x cannot equal positive 5/3. Finally, what we want to do is try to factor so that we can see if this simplifies. So I'm going to start in the numerator. What I notice right away is that they're all even numbers. So I know that they have to have a GCF of 2. So I'm going to start by factoring out 2. And I'm left with 4x squared minus x plus 10. Then I can try to do big X for what's left. We got 10 times 4 on top and negative 1 on the bottom. What two numbers would multiply to 40 but add to negative 1? Well, there aren't any. So this does not factor any further besides that 2. But when I look, I've got 2 times 4x squared minus x plus 10 over 2 times 3x plus 5 times 3x minus 5. And what do you notice? There is something that actually cancels, and it is that GCF of 2. We have one in the top and one in the bottom. So our final answer is 4x squared minus x plus 10 over 3x plus 5 times 3x minus 5. Here's our simplified fraction. Here are the excluded values. Next, we're going to do some solving. We have each of the different methods here represented. So we're going to go ahead and try to solve. We'll start with number 11. This section says cross multiply. You can still use common denominators here. It's totally fine. So if I wanted to get common denominators on the left side, we've got x plus 3, and the right side we've got 4. So if I multiply the left by 4, and if I multiply the right by x plus 3, then I'll have common denominators, 4 times x plus 3. And then I can just ignore the denominators and set the numerators equal. 4 times 7 is 28, equals x times x is x squared, and x times 3 is plus 3x. Now I want to just solve this equation. I notice there's an x squared, so in order to solve, we're going to want to get the equation equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 28 from both sides, and I get 0 equals x squared plus 3x minus 28. Now I'm going to try to factor this. What two numbers would multiply to negative 28 but add to positive 3? And that would be 7 and negative 4. So we get 0 equals x minus 4 times x plus 7. Set each factor equal to 0 and solve for x. And I get x equals 4 and x equals negative 7. Last thing, check, are either of these excluded values? Well, the only excluded value this one would have is negative 3, and these are not that. So here are two of the solutions. All right, this next one says to get least common denominators. So that's what we are going to do. I am going to do problem 16 though. So when I go to solve this one, first step is to factor any denominators that we can. And I can factor 4x squared minus 25. It factors to 2x plus 5 times 2x minus 5. Now, what does this long denominator have that this first denominator is missing? The first one's missing that 2x minus 5. So I'm going to multiply by 2x minus 5, both to top and bottom. Then what's the middle fraction missing that the long denominator has? It's missing a 2x plus 5. Now all three denominators have 2x minus 5 times 2x plus 5. So we can ignore the denominators and just solve the numerators. In the first numerator, we have 2 times 2x, which is 4x. And then 2 times negative 5 is negative 10. Plus 3 times 2x is 6x. And 3 times 5 is 15. Equals 5x plus 5. Now as I go to solve this, I notice there's no x squareds, there's only x's. So I'm going to have to try to isolate x. So what I want to do is get all the x's together and then solve for it. So I'm going to start by, on the left side, combining like terms. I've got 4x plus 6x, which is 10x. And then negative 10 plus 15 is positive 5. Equals 5x plus 5. Now I'm going to get the x's to one side and the numbers to the other. So I'll subtract 5x from both sides. And I get 5x plus 5 equals 5. Then I'll subtract 5 from both sides. And I get 5x equals 0. Finally, divide both sides by 5 and we get x equals 0. Last step is to check, is this an excluded value? Well, the only excluded values we'd have are 5 halves and negative 5 halves. So 0 is a good answer. And there you go. Oh, and that's all. There are no word problems on here, so make sure that you review the word problems in your notes as well.